Great Court at the British Museum. Before museums were known to all as a place where one could go to learn about the history of things around the world, there was a conflict in the construction and intentions of the spaces. According to Sophie Forgan from ISIS, there are three main issues that people have had with museum buildings in the past, and all of them for different reasons. One such as a scientist complaining about the structure being built with the purpose of looking more aesthetically pleasing than working functionally to display collections. Another being that if it wasn't spectacular enough, then nobody would be able to find where it was. And the last, who was an architect that believed the aesthetics and space of a building have the biggest impact on the experience of a visitor. One thing that they all had in common with their complaints was the fact that the experience of the visitors was the most impactful reason for designing a space. The museum building was made to be a place in which knowledge was built into the foundation. The British Museum has been around for over 250 years. Originally founded in 1753, this building has displayed a great portion of the world's history within the country of the United Kingdom. It was known as the world's very first public museum and opened officially in 1759. Before it became known as the British Museum, the building was used as a place for wealthy individuals to view a private collection of rare and intriguing artifacts and objects. This historic landmark became accessible to the public in the time of architect Robert Smirke, who lived from 1750 to 1867. It originally began as the Montague House, which was gradually demolished, but it served as the basis for the new building that would take its place. The image at the top left is the British Museum in all of its glory with the former court that Smirke wanted to create a scale for the size of the building in order to keep it feasible. Since the founding of the museum in 1753, the building has undergone many changes in its construction that has contributed to labeling it the preeminent museum of the world. In the 1800s, Smirke's brother, Sidney, demolished the courtyard and turned it into a great reading room, which became a unique, first-of-its-kind museum library. Then, in Foster's recreation of the museum, he added the Great Court to transform the center of the museum. This was the second time that the courtyard of the museum has been redone in history. Although this time Foster made it possible for the reading room and courtyard to coexist, as the former designers could not make happen. The image in the bottom right is from Norman Foster's book, showing a sectional model plan for the reinvention of the portico from Smirke's original design. Since the completion of the structure in 1852, there have been a few additions that makes the space even more grandiose, those being the reading room and the Great Court, which combined both key elements of the museum. Both installations were added to act in remembrance of what the space once was. These additions were completed in 2000 by British architect Norman Foster, with the goal of restoring the courtyard that made the museum hold a sense of centrality. The image on the left is the plan of the British Museum before the Great Court was added, and the plan on the right is the current plan of the museum with the Great Court in addition. The original building was built in 1852 in the Greek Revival style. This style of architecture was introduced years before by travelers, being inspired and in awe of the ancient Greek monuments and wanted a piece of that history in their own home. Many buildings were inspired by the movement, and especially that of the British Museum. Smirke went for a dramatic take on the traditional Greek style by adding impressive colonnades and a great portico for the entrance of the museum. Designed by Robert Smirke, the British Museum's facade was heavily influenced by the Greek Revival style of architecture. This style became popular in the 1750s when people started traveling to historical sites and were inspired by the impressive columns and designs of the Greek monuments. One of the most famous Greek temples, the Parthenon of Athens, is the main inspiration for the museum's design. The portico was designed to imitate the entrance to an ancient Greek temple and is made up of columns. The columns, all based on the three types from Vitruvius, a Roman architect, are to help support the roof, the three main types of columns being Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. The capital is the section at the top that helps the columns support the roof and its immense weight. In order to do this, it is made to be wider than the columns themselves so that it can distribute the weight evenly. At the museum, the capital is decorated ornately. There are long rows of columns known as a colonnade, which can help support the roof as well. Specific to the museum, there are a total of 43 columns in its colonnade. The frieze is the decorative section that is used for decorative purposes and sits between the pediment and columns. The museum has multiple friezes on display, even from ancient temples in Greece. In the image above, the pediment was built in the 1850s and was designed by Sir Richard Westmacott, and this work represents the progress of civilization. This is the pediment of the entrance to the museum. It's a large triangle that typically sits atop temples, and in this case, the museum. In addition to preserving and exhibiting Greek architectural artifacts, the British Museum was built in the image of ancient Greek temples, so naturally there were a couple that inspired Spurg the most. One being the Parthenon, which sits atop the Acropolis in Athens, Greece. The Parthenon featured Doric and Ionic orders of the columns that held up the sculpted frieze and was created from the Ionic order. It is constructed out of Pentelic marble and was one of the first of its kind to use this type of marble in construction. The museum took after the impressive ancient monument in many ways, such as with the colonnades that hold up the great pediment. Both in great stature of their own, there are many similarities that connect the two structures. The Parthenon functioned in its time as an ancient Greek temple. The monument was named the Parthenon, which means House of Parthenos, and this was derived from the Greek goddess Athena's name, Parthenos, because it was made to be the house of Athena. Being the largest and most prominent temple in Greece at the time, it was a great symbol of power that the city held. The temple served as a place to house the religious life of the city.